know about the two students who had used their guns to stop the attack, and if so, why they decided to report the way they did. I called up 50 reporters. Every single one of them had heard the story about the students using their guns to stop the attack. Virtually all of them had either talked to either one or both of the students who had used their guns to stop the attack themselves, personally interviewing the students. And so I'd asked the reporters, then why is it that you didn't cover it? Maria Glad at the Washington Post gave me what was the typical answer to the extent I was able to get an answer, and she said she only had 913 words to write her story and simply didn't have enough space to go into that. Instead, she had written how the students had tackled the attacker and held them until police arrived, which was true, but it somehow gave the impression that the students had charged across an open field to an attacker who had a gun, which is not something I would normally recommend that people do, and actually maybe giving people the wrong impression about what they should do in that type of situation. And, you think about what's newsworthy. What's more, before I explained how kind of what's newsworthy would explain why many defensive gun users aren't covered. In this case, I think it's the opposite. What's more likely to get readers to go and tell their neighbor, geez, you should have seen what I read in the newspaper? The fact that you say some students tackled the attacker or others ones would say subdued or other similar terms, or to say the students used their guns to stop the attacker. Given the impression people have about how rare these things are, you would imagine the newsworthiness would have been greater if they had actually mentioned the students used their guns. You mentioned assault weapons. Instead they would have, in many of these stories, a couple paragraphs or whatever talking about the types of weapons used in these attacks, and pretty much giving misinformation about what types of guns were actually used. And it just seems
because they don't know. John, they don't even understand. I don't think most media folks know the difference between 9mm and .380.
No, I think you're right. And, you talk to reporters, and they think the civilian versions of AK-47s that we have here in the United States are essentially military weapons. They don't understand that the inside guts of a AK-47 that you go to a gun store and buy is the same as a deer hunting rifle. It's a semi-automatic, which means that each time you pull the trigger, one bullet comes out. That it essentially has the same caliber bullet as a deer hunting rifle, fires with the same rapidity, does the same damage. But they use the term AK-47 as if it is the type of weapon that some military around the world would use, and it's not. And, it's just that some people who own guns like guns that look on the outside like an AK-47.
John, is there an accurate feeling that government wants to confiscate everyone's guns? Because I see this on a lot of conspiracy websites and people I've interviewed. Is that true?
Well, I think there are many politicians who would like to do it. I don't think they're going to accomplish it right away. But I think a lot of these people have very long-term views on these things. They know what types of factors help explain whether somebody's going to own a gun. So if you grow up in a hunting family, for example, somebody's more likely to own a gun.
True.
And so I think the reason why many gun control groups help push with, like, animal rights groups for making people have to go through additional training and regulations to go and hunt is that they realize over the long term it's going to mean that there are going to be fewer gun owners around. And but you look at the statements. Nancy Pelosi just a couple weeks ago was talking about on the Today Show about registration for guns. You have Dianne Feinstein, who was on 60 Minutes just a couple weeks ago, saying that she knew that she couldn't push for assault weapons ban right now, but it was something that she was going to save for the right time in the next couple of years. You have Barack Obama, when he goes down to Mexico, go and put out a statistic which his own administration has already acknowledged is false, and that's that 90% of Mexican guns come from the United States. And you have to wonder why people don't trust them or think that they have some ulterior motive. They're willing to go so far to demonize guns and gun owners, to use a statistic that's false, it's difficult to go and trust them. And you see, I don't think it's by accident that you have ABC and many other media outlets going and attacking guns right now. ABC just had an amazing news special a few weeks ago about the supposed futility about people carrying concealed handguns to stop the types of attacks that you're talking about. They didn't go and look at any actual cases. I mean, I could go and give you lots of cases.
Well, you were one of the best. As a matter of fact, it was your book, More Guns, Less Crime, that helped get Missouri to pass, finally, its concealed weapons law.
Well, thanks. But they had this amazing program where they set up this experiment where they give a student a gun to sit in the class, and they say, well, you're just going through some basic training right now. Later in the day, you'll have to use it. They'd have a trained firearms expert, someone who teaches strategy and tactics and expert marksmanship to police, pretend to be the attacker, come into the room, he'd fire 2 shots at the instructor there, and then start firing at the class. But the thing is, he knew which student had the gun in the class. Within 2 seconds, between 1.5 and 2 seconds after he enters the room, he's firing directly at the single student in the class that has a gun. That's not a real-world scenario. The thing is, not only aren't they experts, the people who engage in these attacks, but even more importantly, there's a huge benefit to having a concealed handgun. When you have 50 people in the room, the attacker doesn't know which person can defend themselves. And in the confusion with people running around and everything, it's very difficult for the attacker to pick out which individual might be able to defend themselves or which individuals might be able to defend themselves and others in the room there. And
it is true that in states that have passed concealed weapons laws, crime has gone down. Is that not correct?
That's right. But not only do you see crime going down generally, but the types of things, these multiple victim public shootings, have plummeted. In states that pass these rules, you see about a 60% drop in the rate at which these multiple victim public shootings occur. For murders, generally, you'll see about 1.5%, 2% drop for each additional year that the laws are in effect. But the reason why you see such a huge impact for these multiple victim public shootings is essentially a simple point with regard to crime, and that is the greater the deterrence, the greater the drop that you have in crime. If I have 50 people in a room, and even if there's only a 3 or 4 or 5% chance that any one individual has a permanent concealed handgun, the probability that at least someone there is going to be able to stop the attack is essentially 100%. And the greater, as I say, the greater the probability, the more the reduction. And Bill Landis at the University of Chicago and I looked at all the multiple victim public shootings in the United States from 1977 through 1999. And the big thing that determines how many people get killed or injured in these attacks is the amount of time that elapses between when the attack starts and when someone's able to arrive on the scene with the gun. It's amazing how few times the gun even has to be fired. Time after time, simply pointing the gun at the attacker is enough to get him to stop the attack. And that's one of the big differences with this firearms expert that was there. Obviously, he knew he wasn't going to be fired back with a real bullet, so there was no cost for him going on. But, the normal types of law enforcement, I have to say, my research, if it convinces me of one thing, is how important police are. I think they're the single most important factor for reducing crime.
Well, and most police officers, as you know, John, I'm talking about the rank and file now, not the chiefs, they support concealed weapons by citizens.
No, I agree completely. And the reason why they do, even though they know how important they are in reducing crime, they know the benefits to themselves owning guns, and they also realize how they can't get there all the time. They almost always arrive on the crime scene after the crime's already occurred. And the question is, what do you advise someone to do when they're having to confront a criminal, or in the case of your question, these multiple victim public shootings by themselves, and simply telling people to behave passively, and the police would never behave passively if they ran into a criminal.
Hey, John, let's talk about the national ammunition shortage when we come back. Well, why is there a national ammunition shortage? Some say it is a combination of factors, including fear and changes in gun laws, the economy, a boost in the number of armed police officers who are using more and more ammunition, and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan contributing to what is becoming a nationwide shortage